Hello all, welcome to oratrainings.com. In this Oracle database programming session, we'll discuss about PLSQL cursor. Let us get into the objectives of this particular session. So after completing this lesson, you should be able to understand what is implicit and what is explicit, and when to use which one, and how do we use a PLSQL record variable, how do we use a cursor using a for loop, and how do we declare a parameterized cursor and fetch the data, and write a cursor that uses a subquery. Okay, so let's start with the first one. So before proceeding, what are the types of cursor? First of all, let us understand what is cursor. So cursor is a placeholder which will hold the result of a SQL query. So here, if you observe in this particular slide, so the cursor is pointing to an array of records which are written by a particular query. And this cursor always points to the first position. And whenever you fetch it, it will always try to get you one record. And later on, it will reach the last position. So cursor always gives you the record. If there is no record available, it cannot give any data. It may give a exception if at all if you're still trying to fetch non-availability of data. Okay. So nothing but in simpler terms, a cursor is a placeholder which has the result of a SQL query. So here, if you observe, let me show you one simple example. Now here, let us say I'm executing this particular query. Now, who is holding this particular result of SQL query? So this particular query result window is holding the result of a SQL query. Similarly, let us say if you write this particular query inside a PLSQL program, there should be a variable which will hold this set of records. Nothing but the output of a SQL query should be held by a particular variable. So the cursor is nothing but a special kind of variable which holds the result of a SQL query. Okay, using cursor, you can find out how many records you fetch, what is the position, what is the current position, and you can find out whether it is able to fetch the data. There are a lot number of other properties which are available for the cursor. Okay, let us get into further slide. Overall, there are two types of cursor. One is implicit cursor, other one is explicit cursor. Okay, so whenever we write any DML statement, including select, insert, update, delete, as well as select. These all the things are, we call them as implicit cursor. Okay. For example, especially for DML, let us say if you're trying to perform insert, update, or delete. So what we are trying to do is either we are inserting the data or deleting the data or updating the data. So if you want to find out how many records you have updated or how many records you have deleted, or the database internally maintains a set of implicit cursor to understand how many records it updated, how many records it deleted, and it will take care of all the information that is maintained by the implicit cursor functionality. And this, so the name itself says implicit cursor. It is maintained by the database engine internally. So developer does not have any control on it. Okay. Coming to the explicit cursor, in this one, explicit cursor, the developer defines explicit cursor definition in the declare section, and user has a control on it. Nothing but like a developer can understand how many records it fetched, when to open the cursor, when to close the cursor. It has a name. So there are a lot number of functionalities available for the explicit cursor. Okay. And implicit cursor, if you're using the implicit cursor for the select statement, that can fetch only one record. But coming to the explicit cursor, that is having a capability to fetch more than one record. Okay. Now coming to next slide. Yeah. So some more information on the implicit cursor as we discussed. Whenever we use select with into clause, that is called implicit cursor, or whenever we perform DML operations in the PL/SQL, that is also part of an implicit cursor. Okay. And like whenever you perform any of these particular transaction control commands execution in the PL/SQL, that is also part of a implicit cursor. Okay. Using cursor attributes, we can find out what is the DML outcome. Nothing but let us say when you perform insert, you assume that like you have done an insert statement in PL/SQL, but how do we know that the success of your insert statement? Nothing but the insert statement actually inserted into database. How do we know it? Or let us say you have performed a delete, you have written a delete statement. How do we know that the delete statement is successful, right? So successful doesn't mean that execution could be successful, but if you want to know that how many records it actually deleted, you can using the implicit cursor attributes, we can find out that information. Okay. Next slide. So let us see the example of implicit cursor example in PL/SQL. So here, if you observe, it is similar to what the SQL query we write generally in a SQL scenario. But the extra thing here, if you observe, is we have a into clause. Okay, this into clause you can mention either variable name. You can mention multiple variable name, or you can mention a single record variable. Not only is this single, you can mention the record name also, a record variable name also. In the select list, you have to mention the list of columns you want to fetch it, right? You have to mention the list of columns you want to fetch from this particular select. Okay. If at all, let us say if you are mentioning multiple set of columns, and if you want to store all this set of columns in a single record, just mention the record variable name. But here, if you observe, this particular query should return only one record. It has to return one record. If it does not return any record, it will get into exception. Or if it returns more than one record also, it will get into exception. Okay. Now let us see the simple example here. So in this example here, if we observe the declared section, we declared a variable called department v underscore dbt, which is of number type. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to fetch the department number for the department name, D name, accounting. So in this particular department table with the name accounting, there is only one record. So it will give you the department number of this particular accounting. Okay. So let us write the similar samples. Okay. Now what we do is I want to find out who is the current user logged into this particular database. Okay. So before that, let me save my okay. I'll say implicit cursor one.sql display the current logged in username. So there are a number of ways of writing it, but I just want to use implicit cursor to get the username. Okay. Declare begin end. Now I'll just say variable username varchar 200, and I'll say select user into v underscore username. Okay, from dual. Okay. Now let us display the username. Logged in username is equal to v underscore username. Okay. So let us execute this one. Okay. The logged in username is apps, apps apps. Okay. So let us write one more simple example. So I'll just open one more window. Write a program to fetch the employee number. Okay. I want to pass the employee name and I want to fetch the employee number. So which table we want to consider, right? So first thing what we want to do is we just want to know which particular table we want to consider. So let me save this program first. Write a program to fetch the employee number based on employee name. Okay. Now this time I want to use a table called per people X. This is one of the HRMS employee table in the Oracle e-business suite, and this is also available in Cloud Fusion, Cloud ERP also. Okay. So I just want to fetch employee name. Sorry, I want to fetch the employee number based on the employee name. Okay. Now just see some of the columns here. I have person ID, full name, and person number, right? Or employee number. Just see that. Yeah, employee number. Okay. So these are the some of the columns. Now I want to pass the employee name and get the employee number. Okay. So I'll just comment this query now. Okay. So declare begin and okay. V underscore employee name. Employee number is a varchar here actually. If you're not aware of what is the data type of it, the best thing you can do is you can simply mention like this. Or if you feel difficulty in finding out all those things, best thing is always mention the column names like this. Okay. Now write this query here. We want to fetch only employee number, right? We want to fetch only employee number. So for which employee, let us consider the first one. So I'll say where full underscore name is equal to, I'm hard coding this one as of now. Okay. Now we want to fetch only employee number. I'll mention this one into, okay, like this. Now what we have done, we have written a query and we are just passing the full name. If at all, if you want to pass the full name using variable, you can do that also. F name varchar2, I'll say 250, and you can assign the value here like this. V underscore F name. Now we can mention the value like this. Yeah. Now we declared a variable F name which is holding the employee name. We have declared a variable employee number which will hold employee number, and the implicit cursor, this is called implicit cursor, which will return the employee number, right? Now then after that you can try to print the value of employee number, v underscore emp underscore. Okay, yeah. So now the employee number is 4. Okay, now let us say assume that like the employee name which I'm providing is not available here. Okay, so I just provided some junk employee name which is not available in my table. So if you try to execute, it will get into an exception, right? Now what it is telling, no data found exception. It means that if this query is not returning any data, it will give you the no data found exception. Okay, and similarly, let us say assume that if I comment this one, let us say I'm trying to fetch all employee names. Right here, what is happening, this variable can hold only one employee name, but this query, I've removed the where condition. So what will happen, it will provide you all the list of employee numbers which are available in the system. So now if you try to execute, it says that the exact fetch returns more than requested number of rows. Okay, to handle all these kind of situation, we have an exception handling. Okay, so now in this session we are not discussing that, but later on we'll discuss about this exception handling scenarios. Okay, now just execute this. Now we got the employee number. So now let's get into the slide. Now coming to the next one, explicit cursor. So when you're trying to use explicit cursor, we have to provide all this functionality. Nothing but you have to declare the cursor, you have to open the cursor, we have to fetch the cursor, as well as you have to close the cursor. So here if you observe, the declaration of the cursor will be done in the declare section, and the remaining all will be in the begin section. So that is why I was telling you that a cursor is kind of a variable, okay? Because whatever you write in the declare section is always a declaration of a variable. The variable can be of different type. So the variable which you define with a cursor type, it's nothing but a cursor type. Okay. So now let us get into the next slide. So how do we declare a cursor? To declare a cursor, you have to mention cursor keyword followed by the user defined cursor name followed by is. Then you have to mention any valid select statement. Okay. So declaration of cursor do not execute the query. So you are just declaring a variable. So declaring doesn't mean that system will execute the query unless you perform the open operation. The cursor will not get executed. Whatever the cursor we write in the declared section, that is only a declaration of a cursor. Okay. Now in this example, what we have done here, so department underscore cursor is a cursor name. We just mentioned the three column names and from department. Okay. Now how do we open a cursor? You have to mention open followed by cursor name. So this particular syntax you have to write in the begin section. So this operation will execute the cursor name. If you are not providing any parameter, if at all, if your query is a parameters based, then you have to pass a parameter. If it is not, you can simply mention the cursor name. Okay. And how do you fetch the data from the cursor? So when we use select clause, we just mention select set of column names into clause. It is almost similar to that, but this fetch operation, what we have to mention is fetch operation, the fetch keyword followed by the cursor name followed by into clause, then followed with a list of variable names or record variable name. Okay. So this fetch operation will fetch only one record at a time. Okay, it will fetch only one record at a time, and it always validates whether whatever the list of columns you mention in the select clause of the cursor, it has to match those set of data types. Okay, else it will not execute. How do you close a cursor? After fetching operation is done, if you have executed all the set of, if you have fetched all the set of records, then you have to perform the closing of the cursor. Okay, it will just clean up the memory. Once you close the cursor, if you try to fetch it, it'll get into an exception. Now there are a good number of cursor attributes are there, which allows us to find out some information on the cursor, whether the cursor is open, whether you're unable to find any data from the cursor, whether how many records you've got from the cursor. You can make use of all these particular things. Okay. And also you have to control the multiple set of fetches. Like if at all, if you are trying to execute a set of records, if you want to control the set of fetch operation, you have to use this set of attributes to control the behavior. Okay. Now, so here if you observe in this example, what we're trying to do is in the declared section, we declared a cursor, select start from department, and we have declared a variable called department underscore record, which is of department row type. Okay. In the begin section, we perform the opening of the cursor, open the cursor name, and then we have used the basic loop. Okay, so there are a number of ways you can fetch the data using a basic loop, while loop. There are a number of ways, but here in this scenario here, if you observe, because we don't know the entry criteria, right? We don't know the entry criteria. So because if you are using a while loop or a for loop, you have to know that like on what basis you can enter the loop. But in this scenario, I don't know what is the scenario I can use it to enter the loop. That is why if you're using a cursor, this is the only way you can try to use it. Of course, there are other ways possible, but in this scenario here, if you observe, I don't have any entry criteria. So I have to use the basic loop only and loop, and I'm fetching the data and I'm trying to get out of the loop when the department cursor is not getting any records. What does this not found mean? So here, if you observe earlier, what does this not found? Not found will become true if at all if the recent fetch does not return any row, right? So as per this particular syntax, what will happen when this particular logic is satisfied, then it will come out of the loop. Okay, so that is what will happen. Okay, now another example. It is similar example. Only thing is we just have a different table name. Okay, so let us write the examples of explicit cursor now. So I'll go back to my SQL developer. 1 minute. Yep. Open the new worksheet. Okay. So now what we do is let us get the sales order details from the system, or I mean to say from my database. Okay. So I'm not providing any criteria, but let us say I'll try to fetch the first 25 sales orders. Okay. Get the 25 sales orders. It can be any 25. I'm not providing any criteria. Okay. So before writing this PLSQL program, first of all, we have to prepare the SQL query. Okay. So when you're working with the PLSQL, we have to finish the SQL part first. If at all, if your cursor involves the query. So I'll just say OE order headers, all right. This is my query. There is something wrong, right? OE order headers all, yeah. Cool. Now I'll just let us try to fetch few columns. Header ID, org ID, as well as order number, 3 columns. Okay. Now I'll comment this one. My SQL part is done. So then what I can do, I'll declare a cursor here. Cursor C underscore get SO data. So make sure that whenever you're defining a cursor, generally we start with C to just understand this is a cursor variable. C underscore get SO data is mention the same query which you have just wrote, which we have written just now. Okay, that's it. Now, so whenever you open this particular cursor, it will return you 3 columns, right? So you have to declare these 3 column variables: v underscore header ID, v underscore org ID, v underscore order number. Okay, so I'll say varchar to 100, and for the remaining 2, I'll just go with the number data type. Okay, now, so declaration part is almost done, right? Now, what is the next thing? Next thing is open the cursor. Open C underscore get SO data. Okay. And here the variable name is not case sensitive, even though we declare in uppercase. Here I'm declaring in lowercase. It doesn't matter, but it is best to follow always a proper convention. Open fetch and close. So okay, here also better too. Anyway, it doesn't matter now. Now the next thing is we want to fetch, right? Fetch into v underscore first column. What we have to return? We have to write header ID, org ID, and underscore order number. Now the next thing is you can mention this close, and now dbms underscore output dot put underscore line, header ID, org ID, order number, v underscore order number, right? Now all good. Let's try. Okay, so we got the data, right? We got this data, but why you are getting only a single record? Because we have performed the fetch operation only once. And here, if you observe, if we try to execute, just select your cursor and select your query and just execute and see how many records will get it. It may be more than 25, right? Very high number. 53,000 records are there in my database. So I'll just mention where row num less than 26. I just want to fetch only 25 records. Now, even still, if you try to re-execute, what will happen? It will fetch only one record because you're performing fetch only one time, right? So the basic thing is you have to perform the fetch operation 25 times. But it is not good practice to mention the looping times, right? Because in dynamic, it has to fetch the data in a dynamic manner. So what we can do is, so open should be outside of the loop, close also should be outside of the loop. Now you write the loop criteria. Loop, this is my loop condition. Inside the loop, it should be there like this, and also this also should be there inside the loop after the fetch operation. Now then after that, you have to mention the end loop. Okay, then perform the exit criteria, right? If you don't mention exit, what will happen? It will get into memory allocation issue. Exit when the cursor variable percentile not found. So best thing is you can try with a small data first to just see how it is working. Then you can change it. Okay. Exit when cursor variable percentile not found. Okay. Can you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? You just got the 5 records, correct? Okay. Now if you try to mention 26, you'll get the 26 records. Okay. If at all, if you want to mention the row number count, you can just do that also. We count number initially, I'll say 1. For every fetch you want to increment, right? We count plus 1, and I'll say row count v underscore count. Okay. Now re-execute. Okay. Row count 27. What is happening is, first of all, see, you mentioned the row count as 1, and you're incrementing. Okay. And now how many mentioned? 25, right? So but you're getting 27, right? And here if you observe, the last record is getting printed 2 times. Can you see the 3202? So now in this scenario, what you have to do is, if you don't want to print the last record multiple times, so what is happening is, see, you have to write. So now let us say fetch operation is there. You have performed once you reach the last record, when you perform the fetch operation, what will happen? Will not this fetch will not get any data, nothing but this is empty, but it will not override this empty data here. It will not override this empty data. But when you're trying to print, what is happening? The last record is getting printed multiple times. Okay. Instead of that, what you can do is you can write the print after the exit. Now what will just see the difference here? execute now, and can you see? Okay, okay. As it started the count from 2, that is why it is 26. Okay, but now what you can do, you can just change it to 0, and now if you try to re-execute and see what will happen. So now 1 to 25, you got the perfect data which we want to get it. So this is how we can simply write an explicit cursor. Okay, let us see one more example using a row type logic. Okay, now what I want to do is I just want to fetch the data from our TCA table. Okay, nothing but I just want to fetch all the list of parties, few columns, or maybe let us say I want to fetch all the columns, but I want to print only few columns. Okay, now this is my TCA table, nothing but heads parties, which will have the customer as well as supplier information. Okay, so these all tables which I'm using are from the EBS. Okay, but these similar tables are available in the Oracle Fusion also. If at all, if you don't have these table, you can just use any available table, whichever you have it. If at all, if you have a EMP table or department table or any custom table you have it, you can just try to mimic the same functionality. Okay, now I just want to use this table to fetch the data. So declare begin end. Now cursor c underscore get party data is select start from headset parties. Now I'll say v underscore rec headset parties percentile row type. Now what we have done here, so we have declared a cursor. We have declared a cursor c underscore get party data, which will fetch all our party information. We have declared a variable v underscore rec headset parties, which will hold a single record of headset parties table. Okay. Now, again, like it will fetch all the data. I don't want to fetch all the data. I just want to fetch only the first 10 rows. Where? First 10 rows. So it doesn't have any criteria. We just mentioned row number less than 11. Okay. Now, so what we can do? Loop, end loop, right? Open, c underscore, what is the name? C underscore get party data. Okay. Fetch into v underscore rec underscore headset parties. Okay. Exit when percentile not found. Okay, this is how we have to write. The only difference is the table name. Remaining logic is as it is. Okay, remaining logic is as it is. Now we can just mention the data here. dbms underscore output dot put underscore line. And how do we mention the variable name now? So what was the record variable? We have to mention the record variable name. I'll just say party name like this. Dot party underscore name. Okay, let's print this one. Okay, let us compile. Okay, we got some issue. So let us see. 11, it says line number 12, column 28, C underscore this one, headset parties. Okay, nothing wrong here. Percentile row type, there is nothing wrong here also. Fetch C underscore this one to record variable. Yeah, so here the mistake here, if you observe, it is already giving the red color underline, right? Exit when, exit, we have to use exit when. Okay, that's the issue. Now let's try to re-execute. Yep. So we got the party name information, right? So if at all, if you want to mention few more variables, if at all, if you want to fetch other column, what you can do is just mention that similarly. Party ID underscore ID. Okay. Now execute this one. Okay. So we are able to see the party ID also. You can, like you can format it so that you can print it properly. I'll just clear this log again. Just here. Can you see? we're able to print party name and party ID. Okay, now let's get into the next one. The other example, other logic we want to consider is cursor using a for loop. Okay, use like using a cursor inside in using a using a cursor with a for loop is one of the easiest way of working with a cursor. So far the cursor, whatever we have done, we have explicitly mentioned the open operation, fetch operation, closing operation. But if you're using a cursor with a for loop, it doesn't need to mention all those things. You can simply write in a very easier manner. Okay, let us write the earlier example using a for loop. This, I mean, the earlier example which we have used, we'll try to make use of for loop with that. Okay, this sample, what I'll do is I'll write with the for loop and see how easy it will be when you're using a for loop with a cursor. Okay, let us see that. So what I'll do is, okay, we don't even require this temporary variable. I'm just removing this. Okay, so I'll just say for loop cursor.sql. Okay, so cursor variable we require and begin. Okay, so it doesn't need to mention any open operation. I'll just say for record variable in, just mention the cursor name. Okay, for record variable in, mention the cursor name, and your loop should be there. You cannot mention fetch operation at all. Okay, you cannot mention fetch operation at all, and end loop, that's it. So the fetch operation, the open operation, fetch operation, and closing will be taken care by the for loop automatically. I mentioned we have to mention a iterative variable, right? So I just used a variable called rec. Okay, so now instead of this record variable name, you have to mention rec, because this rec will always hold the record fetched by this particular cursor. So what will happen is for every iteration, it will perform a fetch operation. For every iteration, it will perform a fetch operation and you'll get the data. And see how simple the syntax is, right? That's it. Okay. Okay. This is how we can make use of a for loop with a cursor. Okay. Let's get in the slide now. So we have seen this example, right? This is for loop with an example with a table, department table, and we are getting all the data, right? Simple one. Now the other the other logic using a cursor without declaring cursor at all. I mean to say there is no need to declare the explicit cursor. Still we can get the data. See, in PLSQL, to get the data from a database, it is always you require a SQL query. So to execute any SQL query in PLSQL, it always involves cursor. Okay, either it implicit cursor or explicit cursor. Generally, so far we have seen that whenever you're using a loops, we always prefer to use the explicit cursor. But in this example here, if you observe, I have written a cursor. Sorry, I have written a for loop. In that we just mentioned a SQL query instead of a cursor name, right? So this is another way of using a for loop with the sub queries. Okay, it will work perfectly, and this is also one of the way which most of the developers prefer to use it. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to fetch the invoice data from the database. I want to fetch the invoice data from database. So the invoice table name is RA customer transaction all. Okay, so I just want to fetch. Let me save it first of all. For loop with subquery. Now this is my table, and I can mention few columns name like a customer transaction ID, transaction number. Okay, maybe few more column names, one more column name. Okay, batch ID I'll mention. I'll just mention batch ID. May not be relevant, but just see how to get the data. Okay, or maybe I'll just mention creation date. So far we have never used the date variable, right? I'll just say creation date. Okay, so now, so these are the three variables I mentioned. Now declare begin, end. So I just want to use only for loop. I don't require any temporary attributes. I don't want to use any cursor. I'll just say for rec in, mention the query name. Okay, mention the query. Let me just change this position. Okay, yep. Now I'll just, so you should not mention any semicolon here, right? For loop, see here, I just mentioned for loop inside in, just mention the query name. Then loop, end loop. Okay. Now what will happen? It will fetch all the records, right? So maybe it is having around 72,000. Better I'll just mention few records only, where row num less than 10. It will fetch 9 records. Okay. dbms underscore output underscore line. Transaction ID is equal to rec dot transaction ID, and now transaction number, and similarly creation date, rec dot creation date. Okay, now let's execute. Okay, good, we got some issue. What was the issue? It is customer transaction ID. Okay, the column name is wrong. Column name is wrong. Okay, that's it. We got all the records we want to find out. Now let us say if you mention any alias name for your column, what will happen? Now instead of like creation date, I want to mention C date. So what will happen? Here also you have to refer to C date only. Then only it will work. Okay. Now execute, right? So this is how we can use a for loop with a subquery. Okay. Now the other important part of the cursor with a parameter. So far we have done what we have done. We have just used a direct query, right? But that is not the real way. So many of the times there is a chance that you may get a parameter from other third-party system or from other third-party program or whatever way it is. So you always need to pass the parameter to the cursor. So what is the syntax? So if at all if you require a cursor to have a parameter to be passed, you have to mention the cursor name followed by the parameter name. Mention the and you have to use those parameters in the select query. Okay, and when you're trying to open the cursor which is having parameters, you also need to pass a parameter. Okay, then only it will work. Let us see this is a simple example. So here if you observe what we have done, cursor c underscore emp, we have declared a cursor which is expecting a variable c underscore department number to be passed. So now in the begin section, what we have done, while opening the cursor, we mentioned the department number and we pass the department number and then we got the data, right? So this is how we can pass a parameter to the cursor. Okay, now let us see the example here. Now we'll just declare a variable let us write a simple program which will fetch the data. What we want to do is we just want to fetch the lines of the purchase order based, what I will do is we'll pass PO number as an input, and we want to fetch the lines of the PO. Okay, so first of all let us write the query. So let's select star from PO headers all. Okay, this will fetch you the PO header data, but I want to get line data, right? So let us write that ph dot PO header ID first of all, ph dot segment one. Okay, so this is just header part. Now similarly, let us write the lines part. I'm joining the lines data with a equi join. Okay, now I'll just mention line data. As of now, I'll just mention 1 minute. Parameterize. Okay, so we have just written a query which is having all the information of the lines, but we don't want to fetch all the line information, right? We just want only few columns of the line, right? So I'll just say line number and maybe a line quantity or something. Okay, line number and quantity should be fine for now. Okay, okay, now, yep. So I'll just make a note of few P1 numbers. Okay, let us say 500, 300. Okay, let's start 300, 400, whatever it is, right? Now let us say if I pass ph dot segment 1 is equal to 300, it is varchar. Okay, how many records we're getting? Around 25 records. Let us say if I pass 400, we got around 18 records. Okay, so I'm just dynamically passing the data. This query is not exactly correct because like the P1 number can be repeated. We have to consider the org ID also, but very simple one I'm just design which I have designed here. Now this particular value I need to pass dynamically. Okay, so I'll just copy this query for our reference purpose. Okay, now write the logic. Declare begin and end. Cursor c underscore get PO line data c underscore cursor parameter c underscore p underscore PO number varchar. Varchar is mention this one, and now here copy this cursor parameter and mention here. Okay, this one. Okay, now what we can do is we can just use our for loop logic itself for rig in. Okay, for rig in, mention the cursor name, mention the value. Okay, you can pass via parameter or you can hard code it. Either way you can use it. You can just end loop. Okay, and just see whether it works or not. As of now what I've done is I'm just writing a simple empty statement, because whenever you're using a for loop, or not only for loop, when you're writing any logic in the PLSQL begin block, always it requires one empty state. It requires at least one statement. Null is also one of the empty statement. Okay, it is one of the statement which is empty, I can say. For rec in the cursor variable, right? I'll just say cursor. Yep, see what will happen now. Okay, it got executed perfectly. It means that there is no error in this one, but it has not printed anything because we have not written any logic. I'll just write here dbms underscore output underscore line, and now I'll mention p1 number rig dot segment 1. Maybe you can mention line number rig dot line underscore num, right? Rig dot line underscore num. If you want to print the quantity, you can mention the quantity information also, right? And to have a proper formatting, we can just do all this particular extra formatting thing so that data will be displayed properly. Okay, as of now we have been displaying the data in the console, but that is not the real purpose. Okay, later on we'll be creating a programs like a stored programs, then you will really understand how the output of a program will be sent to the third party system. Okay, as of now whatever the things which you are writing, it is just to explore the PLSQL functionalities in a independent manner. Okay, right. So now I just executed, we got the all the lines. Okay, of course you'd see that like data seems repeated, but it's not. I was telling you, right, like we need to write some more extra condition, but this example to show you how we can write a query with a cursor with a parameter and how to fetch the data. Okay, now let's get back to slide now. So far we have seen the cursor with parameter, and the next one is here. If you observe, it is cursor with a software. So when you're writing a query in the cursor, it can be a simple query, or it can be a subquery, or it can be a joined query, whatever it is, right? It should be a valid query. Okay. This example is just to showcase that like you can write a subquery, your query in the cursor can have a subquery also. That is what we want to showcase. Okay. Now coming to the last line. So what all we have learned so far? We have seen the different types of cursor, the different cursor attributes, and how do we use a cursor with a different set of loops. Basically, we have seen two loops, like a basic loop as well as for loop. How do we declare a cursor with parameter, as well as how do we design a cursor with a subquery? Okay, thank you.